2 million years ago, the continent of Africa was a much different place. Seemingly familiar animals such as baboons or big cats were anything but familiar. Several upright walking hominids, some ancestral to us, scraped by amidst these terrifying animals. But by far the strangest was Paranthropus. With its powerful jaws, massive teeth, and unsettlingly human-like face, Paranthropus occupies a space that plunges us deep into the uncanny valley, where the line between human and other blurs. These strange hominids survived the torments of the Pleistocene by eating plants and possibly making tools. They thrived for over 1 million years alongside our ancestors before ultimately vanishing. But their story doesn't end with extinction. Why did they disappear? What does their coexistence with our ancestors reveal about us? And did they give us herpes? Their story is a fascinating example of how strange evolution can be, and a reminder of the unexpected legacy of prehistory that has shaped our world. So without further ado, let's learn about these fascinating hominids. The first Paranthropus fossils were discovered by a South African schoolboy in 1938. The fossils were brought to paleontologist Robert Broom, who found more fossils at the site. He found teeth, a lower jaw, a partial skull, and postcranial elements. The fossils looked like that of Australopithecines, but were much more robust. Broom decided to classify these remains as Paranthropus robustus. Paranthropus means beside or alongside man, highlighting that these fossils seem to represent an evolutionary offshoot, not ancestral to modern humans. This understanding was quite ahead of its time. His classification of the new genus was controversial, as some argued it should be classified as Australopithecus robustus. In the modern day, Paranthropus as a genus is still contested, though they clearly represent a distinct branch we call the robust Australopithecines. Since 1938, more than 300 Paranthropus fossils have been found which consist of at least 3 species. In order to understand these hominids, we must get a wider picture of Pliocene Africa. 4.3 million years ago, the first Australopithecines evolved in East Africa. Named Australopithecus anamensis, this hominid walked upright on 2 legs, though it had some traits associated with tree climbing. Anamensis had a small brain and large teeth. They were omnivorous and their diet was similar to chimpanzees or gorillas, eating a lot of fruit but also grasses, tubers, and likely meat on occasion. This hominid is thought to have been the common ancestor of later Australopithecines, Paranthropus, and our own lineage. The reasons these lineages diverged likely has to do with the concept of niche partitioning. Niche partitioning is an evolutionary process that allows competing species to coexist in the same area by dividing resources and using the environment differently. Groups of anamensis began to focus on eating savanna plants, others stuck to the forest, and others adopted a generalist lifestyle. This ultimately may have been what caused these groups to go down separate evolutionary paths. The first Paranthropus fossils have been dated to 2.6 million years ago, though it is likely that their lineage appeared over 3 million years ago. Already by this time, they developed much more robust skulls and jaws which allowed them to exploit hard and tough foods. They were able to eat all the same plants as other hominids, but in addition they could also eat hard and tough foods that other hominids couldn't eat. This allowed them to coexist with other hominids in their own niche and especially helped them when food was scarce. Though their jaws and skulls grew in robustness, their brains remained quite small, and evolutionarily, this makes perfect sense. If all you need to do is eat the same few plants every day, there is no need to have a large brain that wastes calories. Brains are incredibly wasteful organs in terms of energy. In the modern day, our brains use about 20% of our daily calorie intake. Though even over 2 million years ago, larger brains were paying off for our lineage. Our morphology took the path of increasing brain size, reducing jaw size, and likely a partial reliance on exploiting carcasses. A 2015 paper found that carcasses left by predators contain a significant amount of meat and bone marrow that hominins could have exploited. By accessing these resources, we could afford our larger brains. It appears that we went down the route of flexible generalists. Paranthropus, on the other hand, simply went a different route. And though their brains remained small, they clearly were successful as they survived for millions of years. There are 3 different species of Paranthropus. Paranthropus aethiopicus was the earliest species, appearing at least 2.6 million years ago, and appears to have been directly ancestral to Paranthropus boisei, the most well-known species. Boisei appeared 2.5 million years ago and is the most robust of the robust Australopithecines. Boisei had a prominent brow ridge, concave cheekbones, sagittal crest, receding forehead, and a robust jawbone. It has the most heavily built skull of any hominid, along with some of the largest molars and thickest enamel of any ape. Due to this, Boisei was originally thought to have been specialized for eating hard foods such as nuts. However, dental evidence suggests that it had a generalist diet of C4 plants, which includes grasses and underground storage organs. Their large molars would have allowed them to process a large amount of food at a time, though its powerful jaws may have been quite useful during droughts and environmental stress when they had to fall back on resources that other hominids couldn't eat, such as nuts. This gave Paranthropus an ecological edge on other hominids, including our own ancestors. Boisei had a significantly large sagittal crest, which is a ridge of bone running across the top of its skull. This feature allows muscles to attach to it, muscles which move the jaw up and down. Gorillas notably have a sagittal crest that gives them their large forehead. Orangutans have them and some chimpanzees do, though they are typically quite small. The skull of Aethiopicus, nicknamed the Black Skull, has the largest sagittal crest that we have found on the human lineage. This feature would have given them quite tall and strange-looking heads. Boisei's brain size was between 450 to 550 cubic centimeters. To put that into perspective, chimpanzees have a brain size of around 400 cubic centimeters. So their brains were quite a bit larger than chimps, but generally similar to other hominids. Our ancestors that lived alongside them, depending on the time, had a brain size between 500 to 900 cubic centimeters. So the early species in our line, such as Homo habilis, had a brain size similar to Paranthropus, but as the Pleistocene went on, a larger brain would develop, especially in Homo erectus. Anyways, Paranthropus was sexually dimorphic, with males being much larger than females. Their body size can be difficult to determine based on fragmentary remains. Males are estimated to have been 4'6" or 137 centimeters tall, and weighed around 108 pounds or 49 kilograms. Females, on the other hand, were around 4'1" or 124 centimeters tall and weighed only 70 pounds or 34 kilograms. Specimens are highly variable but are generally pretty small. They must have looked so out of proportion if you saw one in the modern day. Their skulls are large compared to us and even Neanderthals, despite us and Neanderthals weighing nearly twice as much in many cases. Boisei appears to have been completely bipedal but did retain some ape-like upper body features, though its hands were not adapted to climbing, meaning they likely spent most of their time on the ground. Over the nearly 1 million years Boisei lived, its morphology changed outstandingly little, meaning evolutionarily, Paranthropus was perfectly adapted to its niche. This understanding is important for the wider public's understanding about evolution. If there is no pressure to adapt and an organism is successfully interbreeding, there is no need to physically change. It's not like Pokemon or the stereotypical linear model of evolution where there is an end goal or more advanced forms. Evolution simply creates organisms that have a better chance at passing on their genes to the next generation. Though every species is constantly evolving with each generation, and just because Paranthropus didn't physically change all that much in terms of their bones, they were undoubtedly changing in many ways. Genotypically, as in genetically, Paranthropus was undoubtedly adapting. We just don't have the soft tissue or genetic material to know how. Though in 2023, fragmentary genetic material from a 2 million-year-old Paranthropus tooth was retrieved. This is the oldest genetic material ever retrieved from a hominid, and could help us understand the evolution of their genus. While Boisei mainly lived in East Africa, another species, Paranthropus robustus, lived in South Africa as far back as 2.2 million years ago. Robustus had many of the same characteristics as Boisei, though they differed anatomically in many areas. Generally, their skulls and mandibles were not as heavily built, and they appear to have had a more generalized diet. They were also smaller than Boisei at an estimated 71 pounds or 33 kilograms for males and 53 pounds or 24 kilograms for females. Their brains were generally around the same size, though they may have been a bit smaller on average. A nearly complete skull of Robustus was discovered in 2020 and had a cranial capacity of 450 cubic centimeters. This skull is also just fascinating. I mean, the coloration of the fossil is really astounding. The main difference of Robustus was its diet, which is why its skull was less heavily built. Depending on the season, robustus mainly consumed C3 forest plants or C4 savanna plants. This may indicate that they migrated seasonally. We do have evidence that they put their jaws to work as many of their teeth were chipped, and interestingly, they also had a high cavity rate, suggesting that they may have consumed honey. One of the most fascinating aspects about Paranthropus is that they may have been proficient tool users. The use of tools certainly predates Paranthropus and even our own lineage. Chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans all use tools including sticks, spears, and rocks to smash nuts, though no other great ape has been documented making a sharp stone tool. Flint knapping is the process of shaping a stone core into a stone tool. It consists of breaking the stone to create a sharp flake and core. These tools can be used to cut meat, plants, or shape wood and other materials. The oldest stone tools we have ever found date back to 3.3 million years ago, before our genus or Paranthropus even appeared. We also have 3.4 million year old evidence of bones with cut marks from stone tools. But it wasn't until around 2.6 million years ago that Oldowan stone tools were systematically produced. And then they appeared all over Eastern and Southern Africa. Though these tools are typically associated with our genus, Paranthropus overlap temporally and geographically with their manufacture and use. The use of Oldowan tools is commonly associated with the exploitation of carcasses. Being able to cut and scrape meat off of an already eaten carcass would have provided these hominins with nutritious and calorically dense food. A 2023 paper looked at hippopotamus butchery sites in Kenya. These carcasses were clearly butchered by stone tools that were found at the site, and a particular butchery site contains a Paranthropus molar in clear association with the artifacts and butchered remains. Though we cannot be 100% certain of which hominid used these tools and butchered the carcass, this is direct evidence of Paranthropus being involved. Though not conclusive evidence, it is pretty good given how difficult it is to answer these questions. We know that the hands of Paranthropus were capable of a precision grip needed to make flaked stone tools. They very well may have been manufacturing and using these tools, or even just using the tools that our genus was making. Even if it was our genus that was engaging in butchery of carcasses with stone tools, you have to imagine that Paranthropus, which lived alongside them, would have noticed and may have copied their behavior. You may have seen this famous photo of an orangutan spearfishing after reportedly seeing locals spearing fish. Apparently it is just a cool photo and its attempt to spear fish failed miserably. But still, I think we should consider that Paranthropus would have been curious and intelligent enough to watch what Homo erectus was up to. Fortunately, we even have some more evidence that Paranthropus was a tool user. Caves with more Paranthropus remains are associated with more bone tools than caves with Homo erectus remains, suggesting that Paranthropus was actually the creator of these bone tools. Bone tools may have been used to dig up storage organs and termites, harvest and process plants, or even for self-defense. The bone tools in question were typically made from the long bones of animals, though ribs, mandibles, and horn cores were also used. This has to remind you of 2001: Space Odyssey when the hominid starts using the bone tools. Such tools could have certainly functioned as skull-crushing weapons for adversaries or predators. Imagine a group of 10 Paranthropus armed with bone clubs. Such a group could certainly defend themselves from leopards, hyenas, or even early humans. In reality, they would have been mostly used for digging, but defense is possible. The tools used by Paranthropus in South Africa were unmodified, but their preference for certain bones supports their use as tools. In East Africa, the bone tools appear to have been cut and broken into specific shapes. Once again, the evidence of Paranthropus using bone tools is circumstantial, but from over 1 million years ago, this is the kind of evidence that we have to work with. And to cap it off, there may be evidence that Paranthropus used fire. At Swartkrans Cave in South Africa, archaeologists found out of 60,000 bone fragments, 270 had been burnt. They were found across layers at Swartkrans Member 3, indicating that fire was regularly occurring. It was determined that they were heated to below 572 degrees Fahrenheit or 300 Celsius, which is consistent with a small fire from local white stinkwood. Some of the bones even had cut marks, suggesting that they may have been cooked and eaten. The evidence dates between 1 and 1.5 million years old, making this some of the oldest evidence of fire found in the archaeological record. Both Homo erectus and Paranthropus remains were found in the cave. If this was indeed intentional use of fire for cooking, it is possible Paranthropus was involved. though perhaps it is more likely to attribute it to the bigger-brained Homo erectus, which has a long history of fire use. Anything is possible, and researchers won't rule out Paranthropus simply because of its brain size. Overall, Paranthropus very likely used and possibly created tools. They may have even knapped sharp stone tools and shaped bone and wooden implements. The evidence is about as strong as we could hope for, unless we were to find an entire Paranthropus skeleton still holding some kind of tool. Now that we have an understanding of Paranthropus, let's talk about the wider ecosystem around them. Paranthropus lived alongside our own ancestors in eastern and southern Africa. The environment varied across this range greatly, though Paranthropus and early humans appear to have favored wetlands around lakes and rivers. These areas would have been wooded, though much of it would have been semi-arid with shrublands present. Some evidence indicates that Paranthropus also inhabited the savanna. Boisei appears to have mainly eaten savanna plants, while Robustus ate both savanna and forest plants depending on the season in some cases. Paranthropus would have been relatively flexible, though the most abundant food was always found near water in which monsters lurked. Crocodiles would have been a constant threat for Paranthropus. Crossing a stream or drinking from a water source risked an attack from crocodiles such as Crocodylus anthropophagus. This beast was larger than modern crocodiles, reaching up to 25 feet or 7.5 meters in length. The remains of a left foot of a hominid found in Olduvai Gorge had the bite marks of a crocodile on it. Another find nearby consists of a hominid bitten by a crocodile and a leopard, perhaps on the same day. We are not entirely sure if this individual belonged to our own line or Paranthropus, but either way it is clear that they lived dangerous lives. There are a variety of other animals present in southern and eastern Africa that would have made life hard for Paranthropus. Dinofelis, Meganterion, and Homotherium were all saber-toothed cats that lived alongside Paranthropus. These animals ranged from the size of a leopard to the biggest lions. Such powerful animals could have killed a Paranthropus with ease. More familiar animals like the ancestors of lions, leopards, and hyenas would have also have been a problem. Other primates may have been just as dangerous. Dinopithecus was a massive relative of the baboon. The largest males exceeded 170 pounds or 77 kilograms and had fangs up to 5 inches or 12 centimeters long. Therapithecus oswaldi was an extinct species of gelada that could weigh up to 160 pounds or 72 kilograms. Both of these animals would have been absolutely terrifying to run into. Baboons can be quite vicious and territorial animals. They bite, wrestle, and kill each other. Luckily for us, they are usually quite small in the modern day, though imagine one that is nearly twice your weight with massive fangs. In previous videos I talked in length about the encounters of Homo erectus with these terrifying animals, so go check it out. But another animal could have been even more terrifying: our own ancestors. Paranthropus lived from 2.6 million to roughly 1 million years ago, and this entire time was spent in the midst of our genus. They would have encountered Homo habilis, Homo rudolfensis, Homo erectus, and Homo naledi. We even have evidence that Paranthropus and Erectus literally crossed paths. A paper from only about a month ago described the footprints of distinct hominids crossing paths 1.5 million years ago in Kenya. The authors determined that the tracks were made only hours or days apart. The footprints were quite distinct, and the gait and stature of these hominids differed significantly. Both of these hominids were certainly bipedal, but their locomotion was very distinct, leading the authors to hypothesize that the prints were made by different species. And considering the time and location, the most likely candidates were Paranthropus and Homo erectus. Erectus may have been a friend to Paranthropus, or maybe their greatest fear. We know that Homo erectus was a great tool user, developing the first Acheulean hand axes 1.8 million years ago. It is likely that they also used simple wooden spears, possibly throwing spears, clubs, and plain old rocks as projectile weapons. Running into a group of Homo erectus armed with spears and stones may have been more terrifying than Dinopithecus, as they were intelligent and armed. Dinopithecus may have had deadly teeth, though they didn't throw rocks or impale you on a spear. But besides violence, there may have been wholesome moments between these species. Since they weren't necessarily in competition over food, they could have coexisted peacefully. Chimpanzees and gorillas will forage with one another in some areas where their range overlaps. Sometimes the chimps go crazy and kill their infants, but otherwise they are mostly peaceful. And we actually have some evidence that Paranthropus was a little more than peaceful with our early ancestors. Herpes is one of the oldest viruses. Virtually all vertebrate species have at least one herpes virus, though we have two different strains, HSV1 and HSV2. This is unique among the other great apes. We have had HSV1 forever. It is our strain, though HSV2 is much closer to chimpanzee herpes, meaning that we must have caught HSV2 from another hominid. Genetic research has found that HSV2 diverged from chimpanzee herpes around 1.6 million years ago. Based on geographical overlap of ancient hominins and chimpanzees, it was found that Paranthropus boisei is the most likely candidate. At some point, Paranthropus populations contracted genital herpes from the ancestors of chimpanzees, and then they passed it on to our Homo erectus ancestors. So yeah, Pleistocene Africa was freaky. Herpes can be transferred in a number of ways. It may have been during a violent interaction, sharing food, eating each other, though most often through sexual activity. Were Paranthropus, ancient humans, and chimps all getting it on? We don't know for sure. It could have just as likely been transmitted through blood. HIV was transmitted from chimpanzees to humans that came in contact with their infected blood. This was likely due to hunting and eating chimpanzees, which, as gross as it sounds, occurred frequently in the past few hundred years. The 2017 study that pointed the finger at Paranthropus also pointed out that Homo habilis, which lived alongside Erectus and Paranthropus, may have also played a role in the initial transmission. So HSV2 may have been transferred between multiple different species before getting to our own lineage. Paranthropus did likely play a role in this, but let's not be rude to poor old boisei. Paranthropus would ultimately go extinct around 1 million years ago. As with many animals that went extinct, it can be hard to pin down the exact cause. Paranthropus seems to have been more susceptible to climate change than robustus due to its more narrow diet. One study found that the mid-Pleistocene transition shrunk much of their suitable habitat. Paranthropus was generally pickier about its environment than other hominids. Their overall decline in habitat may have dwindled their numbers, making them even more susceptible to droughts or competition with other animals. Our own ancestors may have outcompeted them for resources and pushed them towards extinction. Though early Homo could and did coexist with Paranthropus for over 1 million years, why would they suddenly feel the need to push them into extinction? Perhaps they were fighting over shelter or territory. We may never know for sure why this wonderful hominin was pushed into extinction. I really wish they survived into the modern day so we would have an example of how wonderful and mysterious evolution can be. Imagine how Paranthropus might fit into modern human society throughout history. They may have been grim and full of harsh treatment, or they may have generally stuck to themselves like chimpanzees and gorillas. When we look into the eyes of a long-gone Paranthropus skull, we should realize that they once gazed at our world with complex thoughts and feelings of their own. They were not some primitive evolutionary mistake, but rather a people that survived for over 1 million years alongside our own ancestors. They are inherently part of our story, the greatest story ever told. Thanks for watching this video. It was truly fascinating to learn about these hominids and the wider environment of Pleistocene Africa. The story of our ancestors is truly so much more fascinating than any fantasy world I have ever come across. Make sure to like the video in honor of Paranthropus and comment something down below. Maybe compliment Paranthropus because we were kind of mean to them in this video. I think they would really appreciate it. This has been your host North02, and I hope to see you on the next one. Arrivederci.